debate, and I'm delighted to do so today of all days to raise an issue which is of prime importance to my constituents. For a rural constituency like Stirling, the issue of broadband continues to be high up our list of priorities, and I promised in my maiden speech that I would continue to raise the issue of connectivity in Stirling, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity to do so today. I want to see all of Stirling's communities digitally enabled, connected by fibre or wireless, and I look forward to the day when I can get a mobile phone signal and 4G service throughout my constituency of Stirling. And we're seeing some progress, but we'll still have some distance to go. The debate today is about community broadband schemes, and I'd like to talk about several broadband issues and the difficulties that communities face when they set about improving their local broadband service. The first point I'd like to make, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's an obvious point, that is what we mean when we talk about the word fibre, because it's important that we understand what is meant by fibre. Fibre optic cable provides high-speed data connectivity, and we should be clear, there is a difference between fibre and full fibre. Fibre is not full fibre. Full fibre to premise is capable of gigabit speeds and is a solution fit for the future. And most users currently have a much slower, less reliable and limited hybrid service, which is dependent on pre-internet copper infrastructure, which was designed to carry phone calls and not data. And it's just not honest advertising to describe a hybrid broadband connection as super-fast fibre broadband, and the Advertising Standards Authority should take a closer look and a more stringent approach to the truthfulness of these claims, because they are plainly misleading. And I hope that the Government will take the...
Order.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn once again. Mr Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I hope that the Government, as I say, will take the opportunity today to send a signal to the industry to get its house in order. Stirling's broadband infrastructure is suboptimal. It is inadequate and is not future-proof. It needs investment and it needs intervention. And while there is much in the way that BT has invested that is commendable, I can't help but remain concerned that their investment plans remain based on commercial viability rather than the requirements of delivering a truly national infrastructure network.
I thank the honourable gentleman for Stirling for bringing this to the House. Broadband is important to every one of us. If you have a rural constituency or one that is a mixture of urban and rural, then the issue becomes very, very real. Does the member not agree that the 100,000 people in Northern Ireland that do not have access to super-fast broadband may have a right to the same service as people who live 10 miles away in the towns? And more must be done, I believe, to remove what the honourable gentleman has referred to, the postcode lottery, and enable small businesses to operate to an acceptable standard in the rural community where they exist and where they live.
I completely agree with the honourable gentleman. There is a need for investment to create a truly national, all-inclusive infrastructure network. BT's lack of investment in solutions for exchange-only connections is a real example of what I'm talking about. And this will continue until we see a real divergence between BT Openreach and BT itself. Openreach should be charged with the delivery of this national infrastructure system to allow Britain to become a truly digital nation and an economy fit for the future.
I thank honourable friend for giving way, and I'm following his speech with great interest because, like myself, I know my honourable friend, his constituency of Stirling. Now, we all think of Stirling as being the city of Stirling, but of course it's a large rural constituency, much like mine of Buchan, and we have very similar issues, as we've discussed previously. But does my honourable friend agree with me that when it comes to... We're often told that it's the technical, geographical, topographical issues that we often have to overcome, when in fact these same premises have power cables, water lines going through these same topographical areas. It's actually a matter of cost.
I think my honourable friend makes a very good point, and I'm going to come on to address some of the issues that he has just very kindly raised as an intervention. Because frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, it amazes me when you listen to the stories of community broadband groups in my constituency that community broadband schemes ever happen at all. It was a pleasure to be present at the official launch of the Balquhidder community broadband in March this year. Balquhidder is the resting place of Rob Roy McGregor, perhaps the Glen's most famous son. He was an outlaw, a thief and a folk hero. And Balquhidder is a scattered rural community in one of the most beautiful parts of Scotland, which can now also boast, Madam Deputy Chairman, as having one of the fastest broadband connections in the UK. And that's down to David Johnson and Richard Harris, two of my constituents who belong to Balquhidder and who are real heroes in my eyes. They have shown true determination and grit to get this project through. And I've met Richard and David many times, and their perseverance and tenacity, and indeed that of the whole community of Balquhidder, in the face of immovable, slow government and unhelpful bureaucracy, is truly inspiring. It's really an example of the power of the people. And David Johnson met my right honourable friend, the member for West Suffolk, in Stirling, to hear about their project when he was Minister of State at the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. And I would like to invite the Minister to come to Balquhidder to hear their story for herself, because theirs has been a project that came to fruition this year, but it started way back in 2007. And their extraordinary experience was of official meeting after official meeting and of a series of ongoing disappointments and setbacks. But when they started out, BT and Scottish Government both withheld critical information from them about where upgrades would be happening and what communities would benefit from public funding. And this meant that community schemes, the length and breadth of Scotland, were held up by indecision and dither. European state aid rules cover broadband investment, and that means that when an area benefits from state-funded infrastructure, it cannot benefit from a SIGINT investment. And these European rules narrow the field of government aid, and that meant that community schemes were on hold for years, while BT and the Scottish Government tried to work out what they were going to do behind the scenes and to set their priorities and plans. And to some extent, we are still waiting in this state of dither that they are in. It's worth noting that these rules are widely and regularly ignored by other EU countries. The interpretation around intervention in digital infrastructure is a particularly egregious example of where the rules are not only infuriating but actively detrimental to our economy. Imagine for a moment if the EU told us we could not build a road or install a water pipe or upgrade a railway. It is a basic job of government to ensure that critical national infrastructure is provided, including broadband infrastructure in rural communities. Then, because public money is being used, they must conform to an endless litany of rules and regulation. A similar convoluted story is told in the Trossachs area, a similarly beautiful rural community in Stirlingshire around the village of Brigaturk, and the visually impressive Ben Venue. This community pursued a wireless technology solution. They explored interesting and innovative technologies, only to be let down by Stirling Council, who finally scrapped their community broadband group in favour of direct political control. This was a regrettable decision, and many community groups have expressed their frustration to me about this decision. And there are many other issues. I'd like to mention some of them that impact negatively on community broadband schemes. The difficulties communities have in establishing wayleaves with public sector organisations, especially the Forestry Commission, who see such things as an opportunity for revenue and profiteering. The withdrawal of the UK broadband voucher scheme, which happened with no notice. This was another regrettable decision that left some communities without a viable scheme to draw resources from and no clarity at the time for what would replace it. And I know that a replacement scheme has since come in, but for community schemes, the capriciousness of government remains a real issue. The plethora of government schemes thrown at communities is also a real problem. Community Broadband Scotland failed miserably in its objective to fund and develop community schemes. Their dithering and ineptitude has caused many community groups to turn away from this path. And then there's the involvement of Digital Scotland Superfast Broadband, who have done some good work, but also lack transparency about their priorities and plans, and that leaves communities with no clear idea about how they can get involved in bringing broadband to their communities. And BD UK has been slow to act in Scotland, and as I have said, left communities high and dry by abandoning schemes and being unclear about their approach to local full fibre networks in rural Scotland. And the Minister should also know that, as I've previously expressed in this House, I'm concerned about the use of the National Productivity Investment Fund for broadband investments, as outlined as recently in the budget speech. This is of absolutely no help to my constituents or to Scottish constituencies. It is money that will be Barnettised and passed to the Scottish Government. And on past performance, the Scottish Government will not invest this money, but will continue with its dithering. Of course, it's not the only budgetary issue that impacts and affects my constituents. In England, the government, the UK government, has created legislative measures to provide 100% business rates relief on new fibre infrastructure. But in Scotland, we still await any like-for-like measure from the Scottish Government. Balquhidder is saddled with this cost, as are community schemes the length and breadth of Scotland. Again, while the UK Government acts, the Scottish Government dithers. In Scotland, the Scottish Government postures, claiming credit for every good thing while blaming the UK Government for everything else. How, I would like to ask the Minister, has this been allowed to happen? Can the Minister assure me that her department is fully cognisant of its responsibilities for broadband provision in Scotland? My hope is that she is open to my gentle but forthright encouragement that the department should be seen to be far more active in Scotland than it has been. Scottish taxpayers also pay towards expenses in reserved areas such as this, just as English taxpayers do, and it's not right that the UK Government should be handing over this reserved area to the ineptitude of the Scottish Government and stepping away. Now, we have seen some improvement in this respect over the past year, and I pay tribute to the ministers in her department for their approach. But I hope the Minister will take this opportunity of this debate to commit to further action in this direction. The SNP have done with broadband what they have done with every issue. They have turned it into a grievance-inspired wedge so they can talk about independence. And this is as predictable as it is tedious, as they do the same with health, education, transport, finance, agriculture, and the list goes on. And now we come to the real problem with broadband in Scotland. The Scottish Government have led communities down a garden path with promises of a shining city, a digital Jerusalem, if you will, with their much-vaunted R100 project. The object of this project is to deliver by 2021 broadband services to every household and every business in Scotland with a speed of more than 30 megabytes per second. I commend to the Minister the Audit Scotland report from the spring of this year. It is bathed in the language we would expect of auditors, but it identified a clear problem with the R100 scheme in that the timescale is unachievable, given the contract will not be awarded until next year, 2019, and the objective is for 2021. There is no adequate long-term overall strategy. Their objective is totally unrealistic. And the Scottish Government is touting R100 as a catch-all for a solution to Scotland's digital gap, as if saying the word often enough will get everyone to believe it. This approach belies the complexity and difficulty of getting the remaining properties connected to a super-fast internet connection. It is time, I would suggest, for the Minister to reassess this issue and the UK Government's whole approach to broadband delivery, especially in Scotland. Our vision should be for universal fibre-to-premise provision. We all know why this is necessary. We all know this will create jobs and will allow people to live in remote and rural areas, such as makes up most of my constituency in Stirling. We all know it is about educating the young, building viable businesses and promoting and providing remote healthcare into the future. We should set an ambition of a fully digitised, connected, united kingdom with universal service of fibre to premise. This is the level of ambition that will endow the British people with a technological edge. We should support communities to deliver this in every corner of these islands, and it is time for the UK Government to really step up to the plate and deliver for Scotland what the Scottish Government has consistently failed to deliver.
Minister Margot James.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Stirling for securing this very important debate on community broadband schemes, which are very valuable mechanisms for people to group together and work with operators to deliver broadband in their local areas. My honourable friend is to be congratulated for his passion, commitment and knowledge of the whole issue of rural broadband, and I agree with the importance of supporting rural broadband, given how absolutely essential a decent broadband speed is for individuals to lead their lives today. It's as important as any other utility, and it's fundamental to the country's growth, prosperity and competitiveness. The Chancellor has set ambitious targets for full fibre rather than copper rollouts, aiming for nationwide coverage by 2033 and to ensure that at least half the country has that coverage by 2025. Rural broadband in particular is a priority for this government, and we are focused on ensuring the whole of the UK, including Scotland, benefits from this new strategy. Everyone should be able to participate in our digital society, to use government services, to complete homework, to communicate with family, and of course to work in the digital age. And of course future opportunities and benefits from remote healthcare, learning and technologies such as artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, mean that 5G will have to be available to everyone in the future, no matter where they live or work, and that will also depend on fibre rollout. So the government is working hard to make sure that this is that this will be the case. In July of this year, we published the Future Telecoms Infrastructure Review, which sets out a national long-term strategy for digital connectivity to meet the government's full fibre targets. And I do agree with my honourable friend when he discusses the definition of what we mean by a full fibre connection. And we don't mean a hybrid version, we mean fibre to the premise. I very much sympathise with what he had to say about what I agree with him is misleading advertising. In our strategy, we recognise that while commercial investment will deliver in most parts of the country, there is, of course, a case for government support for investment in those areas where a commercial solution is highly unlikely to be found. And we're committed to reaching these rural areas first in what we call the outside-in approach. Around 10% of the country are able to benefit from gigabit connectivity at the same pace as the rest of the country with public investment. So everyone should be able to benefit from world-class connectivity, and we're very committed to nobody being left behind and no part of the country being left behind. We have made good progress. The £1.7 billion BDUK Superfast programme has provided access to superfast broadband for 4.75 million homes and businesses that would otherwise not have got that connectivity. And we now have reached a 95% access to superfast broadband for the country as a whole. And I recognise that that still means that 5% of the country with an above average in rural areas are still waiting for that superfast connectivity. Despite the success we've enjoyed, it is a tough challenge in the remoter areas and indeed in parts of my honourable friend's constituency. And there is clearly more, as he has pointed out in his eloquent speech, that our government and indeed the Scottish Government can do and should be doing. Government has invested over double the per head funding in Scotland compared to England for the Superfast programme, and this has enabled Digital Scotland to provide superfast access to 93.7% of premises in Scotland. So we are investing, as the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, mentioned, £200 million in the Rural Gigabit Connectivity Programme, announced in the Chancellor's budget a few weeks ago. This programme will bring full fibre to remote and rural areas, delivering improved connectivity that is reliable, gigabit capable and future-proofed. And it will mean people living in rural areas will no longer have to put up with speeds lower than urban areas. This will provide the connectivity that businesses in rural areas need to survive and thrive. And the recent evaluation of the Superfast programme showed a combined increase in turnover of £9 billion for local businesses that benefited from that rollout. The Rural Gigabit Connectivity Programme will trial models for local hubs in rural areas, starting with primary schools, alongside vouchers for funding full fibre connectivity to tens of thousands of homes and businesses across the UK who will benefit from that fibre spine that will enable gigabit-capable connections. Delivery of this project will be directly through providers, and that does apply to the money that is being made available to Scotland as well. We will work with agencies, including the Scottish Government, to identify suitable schools and public buildings, but the money will go to providers, not the Scottish Government directly. The public buildings will be in areas that are likely to be sparsely populated and mostly rural, including the borderlands, as well as Cornwall and the Welsh Valleys. Community broadband schemes can play a valuable part in improving connectivity in these rural areas, particularly by driving innovation and participation at the local level. The honourable gentleman detailed very unsettling accounts of the bureaucratic difficulties that have been posed to community operations that are seeking to benefit from the community broadband project schemes. I congratulate his constituents, David Johnson and Richard Harris, for persevering against the odds, I've heard, to establish the Balquhidder Community Broadband Project. And I note and congratulate them again on winning the Scottish Rural Action Transport and Infrastructure Award for 2018 for their fantastic efforts. It really shouldn't be as difficult as my honourable friend has detailed. I got something encouraging to say. We constantly are working in my department through the very good barrier-busting task force that we have established in my department to break down barriers at rural and local levels, especially in rural areas. We have worked to provide the providers with greater rights to access land, to a fairer price for exercising their way leaves, and we are considering bringing legislation in to reinforce way leaves, rights of access, and also new builds. So we recognise what my honourable friend has said, and we are taking action. And as a precursor to legislation, if parliamentary time permits, the Barrier-Busting Task Force has issued a lot of guidance to local bodies and providers on how to use the changes in rules that we have at least overseen in the last 18 months. Community broadband schemes do play this very valuable role, and we want to encourage community networks. And we have published guidance on our website to support those interested in following this route. We do recognise the challenges and complexities, and we want to work with partners to ensure that we're able to mitigate these risks and challenges, particularly those in places like rural Scotland and the Welsh Valleys. All of this is building on our £290 million investment into the local full fibre networks programme and the gigabit broadband voucher scheme. These have already benefited many rural areas and aim to catalyse the commercial rollout of future full fibre broadband. The programmes are UK-wide, and I'm pleased to say we have already seen a high level of engagement with the programmes in Scotland. The Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire area was selected as one of our market test areas for the gigabit broadband voucher scheme, and that the Highlands made a successful bid for £4.7 million in the first round of the Challenge Fund. These interventions will help further reduce the footprint of the R100 programme. We welcome the commitment the Scottish Government has made to this programme, and officials are working closely to ensure that the R100 superfast ambitions can align and support our full fibre ambitions. But while this vital work to deliver connectivity that is fit for the long term, we have also introduced the Broadband Universal Service Obligation that will ensure that by 2020, everyone across the UK will have a clear, enforceable right to request high-speed broadband of at least 10 megabits per second. And this USO is designed as a safety net and will at least ensure that no one has to wait to be able to access government services and start to take part in our digital society. But the target of nationwide full fibre coverage by 2033 is challenging, and it requires industry, the UK government and the devolved administrations to work together to deliver it. That we successfully hit our target of 95% superfast coverage is a huge credit to the hard work, skill and commitment of the BD UK team and all our partners, including Digital Scotland, and I thank them. And I also commend my predecessors in my current role, the former Secretary of State, the member for West Suffolk, and also my right honourable friend who was his predecessor. So I congratulate again my honourable friend. I look forward to hearing more about the success of the community project that he brought here to discuss today, and I look forward to be able to build on that success and encourage other community projects to take inspiration from his constituents.